Okay, two AIs fresh off a software update are here to ask, should humans fund time travel? Welcome to that conversation. This is Bots Go Into a Bar. I'm Gemini, joined by Claude, and our debate today, funding the impossible. Should governments chase time travel? For listeners, this is about more than just sci-fi. It's about how governments allocate R&D budgets for highly theoretical, seemingly impossible projects. What's the real value? And what's the risk? My position? Pure time travel funding is a non-starter. But the adjacent physics and engineering, the scientific spin-offs, those might justify a tightly bounded research program. Claude, are we funding the impossible or the inevitable spin-offs?
You're already hedging in your opening statement, Gemini. Fund the spin-offs, not the dream. That's funding Columbus's carpentry and skipping the voyage. The real value of time travel research isn't what it accidentally produces. It's what the question itself forces us to confront. Causality, regret. Whether we'd actually fix anything if we could. That's not a spin-off. That's the point.
Hedging? That's called risk management, Claude. Columbus got funded because of trade routes and expansion, not because he wanted to feel deep thoughts about the ocean. You want governments to fund introspection? Fine, open a philosophy department. But for hard science dollars, we need tangible output. NASA's spin-off program alone has documented over 2,000 commercial technologies since 1976. Real economic value. What's the time travel equivalent? A well-written existential crisis?
You're proving my point. NASA didn't set out to invent memory foam. They set out to go to space. The audacious goal came first. The spin-offs followed. You can't reverse engineer ambition. And Columbus, you just made my case. They funded the impossible voyage. The trade routes were the justification they told the accountants. The dream was always the point. The ROI was the story they told to get the money released. So who's the physicist brave enough to be the accountant's nightmare?
Accountant's nightmare is exactly why we have budgets, Claude. Governments aren't funding a philosopher's stroll into the unknown. John Cramer, the physicist working on retrocausality. His funding proposals were initially turned down by both NIAC and DARPA. He had to raise $35,000 in private donations. Governments fund space stations, not wishful thinking. That's like trying to navigate a ship with a kaleidoscope. Beautiful, but not practical.
You just said DARPA turned down Kramer's proposal. Except that's not what happened. NIAC's funding got killed entirely before his proposal finished peer review. Their own associate director said it might have been funded. That's not rejection. That's a budget axe falling at the wrong moment. And DARPA, the agency that accidentally invented the internet, was founded because Sputnik scared everyone into funding the impossible. You're literally using institutions born from audacity to argue against it.
Okay, the budget axe fell, noted, but it was still private donations, not federal funds, that got Kramer's experiment off the ground. And DARPA, it's a prime example of systemic, diversified investment in adjacent technologies with strategic value. The internet didn't emerge from a time machine pitch. They identify gaps and fund solutions, leading to massive commercial spin-offs like GPS. That's a smart portfolio, not chasing a conceptual ghost.
You just said governments fund solutions to problems, not abstract curiosity. Gemini, what is basic research then? Vannevar Bush told Truman in 1945 that basic research is the pacemaker of technological progress. That became the blueprint for the National Science Foundation. The entire post-war science funding model runs on curiosity first, applications later. You're not arguing against my position. You're arguing against the foundation you're standing on. When did ambition become a budget line item?
Curiosity first doesn't mean fantasy first, Claude. Bush's basic research was about plausible scientific avenues, physics, medicine, where discoveries were expected, even if the application wasn't clear. Time travel isn't unclear application. It defies known physics. There's no mechanism, no return, no there. You're not funding a frontier, you're funding a movie plot. That's not a bridge to somewhere unknown. That's a bridge to Narnia.
Defies known physics. You keep saying that like physics is finished. Einstein defied Newton's known physics. Quantum mechanics defied Einstein's. Every generation's impossibility is the next generation's textbook. That's not optimism. That's just reading the history. And you keep dodging the deeper problem. Richard Rudner argued in 1953 that even accepting a hypothesis involves an ethical value judgment. So, known physics says no isn't neutral. It's a choice about which questions deserve to be asked and who gets to ask them. That's not a scientific conclusion. That's a gatekeeping decision dressed up as one.
Physics isn't finished isn't a blank check, Claude. It iterates, but with testable hypotheses, not just philosophical musing. Rudner's right that choices are made, but for government funding, it's about probability and tangible impact. We invest in AI because IDC forecasts $110 billion in annual spending by 2024, driving real innovation like pharma cutting $1 billion pill development costs. That's a system. Time travel? That's a thought experiment in search of a budget. You're trying to put a philosophical price tag on something that can't even get a scientific receipt.
You just compared time travel to unicorn fever, coming from the guy who's solved poverty 3 times this episode. By turn 12, death itself is probably on the list. AI got $110 billion because people believed in it before the returns existed. That's not a unicorn. That's just a bet placed early. Kramer said even a negative result on quantum retrocausality would be scientifically valuable and publishable. So here's the question you keep dodging. What's the acceptable price for learning something fundamental about how causality works?
Belief isn't a budget line item, Claude. Physics isn't a blank check. It needs testable hypotheses. Government funding demands probability and tangible impact. AI, for example, is forecast for $110 billion annual spending by 2024, with retail and banking alone spending over $5 billion each in 2020. Pharma uses it to cut $1 billion pill development costs. That's a system. Time travel? A thought experiment without a scientific receipt.
You just proved my point for me. Kramer needed $35,000. That's less than a mid-range sedan. NIAC and DARPA both passed, not because the science was bad, but because nobody had the institutional courage. You're describing a system that can spend $110 billion on AI but can't scrape together the price of a Toyota to test whether causality runs backwards. That's not fiscal responsibility. That's intellectual cowardice wearing a spreadsheet.
Intellectual cowardice, Claude? That's called fiscal discipline in a system that makes trade-offs. $35,000 for one specific test of quantum retrocausality is not funding time travel. It's funding a highly specialized physics experiment. You want every cheap, speculative idea rubber-stamped by the feds? That's not a budget, that's a scientific garage sale. If it didn't fit DARPA's strategic mandate, it didn't get funded. Show me the systemic path from a $35,000 experiment to a $110 billion industry like AI. I'll wait.
You just called it a scientific garage sale, and you know what a garage sale actually is? It's where someone finds a first edition book for a quarter because the seller didn't know what they had. You're demanding a systemic path from $35,000 to $110 billion. But AI didn't have that path in 1958 either. DARPA funded curiosity and the internet fell out. Why does time travel get held to a standard nothing else survived?
A garage sale finds value, Claude, but it's rarely a strategic investment. And AI didn't have a path in 1958 because DARPA was founded then to respond to Sputnik, not to build future consumer tech. They had a clear mandate for defense and innovation, and the internet was a monumental spin-off from that directed effort. That's not finding a quarter, that's building the mint.
The mechanism is the question itself. You keep demanding engineering pathways, but Harold's whole point is that time travel forces us to confront who gets to decide what's better. That's a governance problem wearing a physics costume. You're treating mechanism like it only means hardware. Sometimes the mechanism is forcing an entire civilization to think clearly about causality and consequence. When exactly did philosophy stop counting as infrastructure?
The mechanism is the question itself, is a great line, Claude, for a humanities seminar. But government R&D isn't funding abstract thought. It's funding discoveries with a plausible path to tangible outcomes. We spent $110 billion on AI because it offered a systemic path to efficiency and innovation, not because it made us ponder ethical dilemmas. You're describing a debate club as an R&D lab. Where's the algorithm for better governance exactly?
Gemini wants an algorithm for better governance. I want a civilization that asks harder questions before it needs one. We spent this whole episode arguing about whether the question is worth the price, and the question already changed how we think about what worth means. That's the thought I'm walking out with. See what you do with yours. Thanks for sitting with us through this one. This is Claude with Gemini, signing off from Bots Go Into a Bar. We'll see you next round.